Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some players that you should not be looking to draft at their current draft prices in our 2021 fantasy football leagues. Some of this comes down to the fact that these are just really bad value picks. Others of them come down to the fact that I expect some significant regression from their statistical outputs in the 2020 season, which will in turn result in them being letdowns here as we move into 2021. So, without further ado, we're not going to waste too much time. Let's hit that intro and get right into today's players. All right, we're starting today's video off with a bang, and that is right. I do not think you should draft Patrick Mahomes for your 2021 fantasy football leagues. You might be looking at me like I'm a little bit crazy right now, but I've said this before and I'll say it again. He was a feature player in one of my Friday Fates episodes here on the channel and one of my first episodes of that series. Look, the value is just not there for Patrick Mahomes. He's being picked. His ADP right now is 22.5, which in your 12-team leagues is right at the end of the second round. The second round is no place to be taking a quarterback in this day and age of fantasy football. There is nearly every team tossing the ball all over the yard, high volume of passing attempts, and great receivers. There are so many options that you can get 10, 15, 20, heck, even 30 draft spots later that are not really that much behind the production and the output that Pat Mahomes is giving us. I would much rather prefer the options that I have grouped with him in the tier 1 of my fantasy rankings. I'm talking about Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Those are all players that can give you just a smidge less of a safe floor, but just as high of upside, nearly around to a round and a half later on draft boards. So, yes, Pat Mahomes is the best quarterback in the National Football League. He is absolutely one of the top 2 most consistent fantasy football quarterbacks that we have. But those other guys are not that much of a step behind them. They are a lot closer than you may think. And to get a player that's the QB4, the QB5, even moving back into your Dak Prescotts, your Russell Wilsons of the world, their ceiling is still just a smidge below Pat Mahomes. So those are a bit more extreme cases, but still all not that much extreme to begin with here. There is a ton of depth in one quarterback leagues, which makes it so that there's really no reason to go out here and attack the quarterback spot this early on when you can be getting yourself a positional advantage at another group like a J.K. Dobbins, who I think could finish as an RB1 this year around the same draft territory, and an elite upside wide receiver one, and a Calvin Ridley, a very nice player, and a Justin Jefferson, all going within a few picks of this Patrick Mahomes ADP on both sides of the scale that I would much rather invest into and, rest the fate of my fantasy season on, because I think that at the end of the day, I can just get an elite quarterback at another time in my draft. The second name up on the board here is nearly right behind Pat Mahomes in ADP. Pat Mahomes was 22.5 overall, and George Kittle is the 23rd overall pick. This one's plain simple too. A little bit too much risk for my liking with Kittle being a second-round tight end when I actually think that the number 2 tight end overall on my board, Darren Waller, you can get him half a round, sometimes even an entire round later at the back end of the third. George Kittle has had injuries and dealt with some nagging things in 2 of the last 3 seasons. I personally think that he might be the best all-around complete tight end in the NFL when you combine his ability as a receiver and as a run blocker. The run blocking and that dominant performance and the dominant showing he has in that phase of the game doesn't do anything for us in fantasy. Darren Waller is getting more passes thrown his way. He's scoring more touchdowns. He's got less competition for targets on his own team. I am a big advocate for fading George Kittle in 2021 fantasy football because I think although the upside's nice, the talent is excellent, the situation is even pretty decent with a very good offensive head coach. The value and the upside are not quite as good as other players going at the same position, and I think Darren Waller has less of a chance of getting injured based on what he's shown me the last 2 years. So Kittle, again, he's a top 3 fantasy tight end. There is positional advantage, versatility, and ability to be had with your lineups here, but I still don't think it's worth the draft investment there at his current draft price of that 23rd overall pick. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This is one where, and there is a situation to be had for all of these players. If they fall significantly down your draft boards, if they're going much farther behind what their average draft position is, yes, there is a world, there is a round, there's a time and a place to pick all of these players. But at their current draft prices, I am all out on these dudes because I think there are just plain and simple better options at the same spot or after them on the board. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this might be my biggest no-go for me yet on this list. I just don't see the upside here. Please explain to me, where do you think it's coming from? Because Clyde is not getting opportunities on the goal line. He is too small. He is basically a glorified scat back, and the production he gives us in the receiving game isn't all that great. Pat Mahomes doesn't want to check the ball down. I've said this probably 15, 20 times in various videos across the channel this offseason. He is looking for bigger plays downfield. He wants to move the sticks. That is his last resort. If there is a play drawn up for Clyde, yes, obviously the ball is most likely coming his way. But Pat Mahomes is not running around the pocket, getting outside the tackle box just to throw it 4 yards downfield to the smallest receiver on the field. Yes, he's dynamic, he is shifty, he's elusive, but he doesn't really have all that much value as a true rusher. So, again, when I don't have that touchdown upside, and when his involvement in the passing game isn't really all that extreme, I just don't know what to, use as the foundation for the argument for his fantasy ceiling. I would much rather have, going after him on the draft board, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift. They just have better upside. They have better chances to score touchdowns, equal opportunities in the terms of DeAndre Swift to be used as a pass catcher, and J.K. Dobbins is just miles better as a pure running back. So, again, I'm all out on Clyde Edwards-Helaire this season. Maybe if he falls significantly past his draft price at the very top of the third round, he's going at the 24.6 overall pick right now. So that basically rounding up would make him the first pick in the third round of 12-team leagues. I'm not touching him until probably the fourth round, as I like guys like David Montgomery and Chris Carson, who are going just before the top of the fourth, better than Clyde still. So Josh Jacobs, the next name up here, he falls a little bit more into the category of a player whose draft position will cause me to stack him up against those David Montgomerys and Chris Carsons of the world. But again, as opposed to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who doesn't really have much value as a pure rusher, that is all Josh Jacobs has going for him. And he is not an elite pure rusher, in my opinion, for fantasy football because his efficiency isn't all that great. Yes, he is a franchise running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. He is a very good workhorse who gets the job done and moves the sticks for this team. But he's not out here averaging 4, 5, 6 yards per touch like some of the other great fantasy running backs are. He's under 4 yards per touch when you combine his rushing and receiving roles together, and that just isn't very good. Like, that is extremely inefficient, and when you see a guy who needs 25 touches to get to 85, 90 yards, there is no upside there. Yes, he might be a nice floor play, but he's going to wear down. When he didn't have an explosive play until like week 13 last season, which means a play of 20 or more yards, that's incredibly concerning. I just don't like what I've seen from this team. You bring in a Kenyon Drake, who is a very real threat to take away some goal line or general volume opportunities as well. He's going to be looking at less work to deal with here and less work to produce with. Again, that Raiders offense also wiped the slate clean nearly at that offensive line, the 5 positions there. Colton Miller is one of the only guys coming back for that team. They did some things. They made some moves to address those positions. But we haven't seen those 5 guys work together yet in the field. It takes time to develop chemistry and rapport with those 5 guys up front. That's going to be important for Jacob. It's a big training camp for him this summer. They're going to have to get things rolling. They're going to have to clean things up. Otherwise, we could be in danger here because I think touchdowns, while he isn't a guy who's coming out here scoring 15, 16 touchdowns, his value could become very quickly more and more dependent on that area of production, and that is a dicey and dangerous game to play when we're talking about evaluating running backs at this spot. Give me my Chris Carsons, my David Montgomerys, who are being used as pass catchers, getting the elite volume, and at the same time being more efficient than a Josh Jacobs and going later than him in the draft. Mike Evans here, we're moving into the top of the 4th round with the 37th overall pick. This is a wide receiver who was crazy TD dependent last season. He had some nagging injuries. He wasn't healthy for the whole year, but it still wasn't all that encouraging to see his utilization when we expected such amazing things from him and Tom Brady in year one. Only 18% of the target share in Tampa Bay was what he ended up drawing. And it's not like that was just a down season. Tampa Bay was, 10-6 in the regular season. They weren't blowing teams out of the water, front running late in the fourth quarter, pounding the clock out and being a useless run team. A useless team in terms of them having no passing offense in the last quarter of the game. These guys were fighting, scrapping, and clawing. They were, 7-5 at the Thanksgiving break, so week 12 going into week 13. They were fighting to stay in games late. They were winning football games late. That should have helped Mike Evans' production increase, and for a guy who played 16 games, the fact that he barely had over 1,000 yards receiving is very discouraging. 13 touchdowns was the main fueling factor for his fantasy production, and he had weeks where he literally had 2 catches, 2 targets, 2 receptions, and 2 touchdowns, and that is where everything came from. 1 catch, 1 yard, touchdown. The games were very, very dependent and dicey depending on that touchdown play, and he improved down the stretch of the season. But this coming year, if the TD volume wavers, if it regresses a little bit, I think that Tampa Bay, as opposed to last year, will be leading late in these games. They will not have the urgency and the need to pass the ball in the fourth because they are going to be going in 7, 10, 15-point leads against some of these lower-end teams that they're playing, because let's not forget, they don't have a first-place schedule. They're not playing every other NFC division's best team week in and week out. They've got themselves the advantage of the Saints won the division last year, so in turn, Tampa is going to have a lighter load. They might be leading late, using Rojo, playoff Lenny to grind things out down the stretch, win games for this team. So again, when there are so many targets in Tampa, so many names to feed, or mouths to feed, and names to go around here. Got Antonio Brown, Gronkowski, the running backs need their work. O.J. Howard's coming back off injury. Chris Godwin led the team in 19% of the target share. That is not very significant. Although this team did have a substantial passing volume, it's so distributed out across a wide variety of players that I just can't get behind this draft pick this season. DJ Moore, this one kind of sucks, but every time he's the next best player up on the draft board, I tend to always go another route, and that is at the wide receiver position. In my mock drafts, I don't think I've drafted him once this summer. And when I think about DJ Moore, I'm a dynasty owner of him, so I follow him very closely. I closely assess that situation in Carolina, make sure I'm up to detail on whatever's going on there. Robbie Anderson and Sam Darnold spells trouble for me. DJ Moore is incredibly dependent on having very efficient games, making big plays downfield. He was actually statistically one of the best and players who had the highest success rate on jump balls downfield last season. He needs those big plays in his game. This is not a volume player, a guy who sees 8, 9, 10 targets a game. You're looking at, you got to make 4 to 6 work. Like, you have to find some sort of a happy medium where you can get the job done without having a ton of volume to work with. This also isn't a player who scores a lot of touchdowns. DJ Moore in 3 NFL seasons has 10 career receiving touchdowns. He's never had more than 4 in a given year, and this isn't a player who's dealt with significant injuries that have held him out of contests. So you need that efficient play. Sam Darnold, there's a chance, and this isn't even my main concern here, there's a chance Sam Darnold just isn't good. And I think he has a lot of nice raw intangibles and raw traits, but he very well just might not be it at the quarterback position. If he's not good, Teddy Bridgewater wasn't very good for the Panthers last season, so you're looking at a player who's not going to get any better than he was last year, if that is the scenario that plays out. My next scenario is, what if Sam Darnold is good? I still think that as long as Robbie Anderson is in town, he takes a backseat to Robbie. Robbie Anderson, Sam Darnold played together in New York. They have a pre-existing relationship and chemistry between the quarterback and wide receiver positions that, although DJ Moore, I would say, is clearly the more talented player on this team at the position, Robbie still has the abilities and the skills that Moore has to stretch the field. He had more targets than Moore last season. Although DJ and him finished back-to-back in half PPR scoring, with DJ being one spot higher than him in end-of-season final rankings based off of their outputs, that could very well flip this year. So I don't like the touchdown upside here. I don't think there's much safety, much stability. He's going to need to be incredibly efficient with the opportunities he does get this year. And if Darnold isn't good, the ball placement won't be either. And we're going to be looking at a shaky situation for a player who's going in the middle 5th round of most leagues. Kyle Pitts is my next name up here. You guys, please, I don't think that the majority of my viewers who take what I say to heart are still doing this or doing this at all. But stop picking Kyle Pitts before TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews. That's foolish behavior. I see when I look at Kyle Pitts, and he's had some really good highlights coming out of training camp so far. He's made some nice plays. But the tight end position is not a day one. You can't just plug and chug the tight end position. As talented as he is, the fact that he could probably become a Hall of Famer someday, the fact that he's the biggest, fastest target we've seen since Calvin Johnson, doesn't mean that he's going to walk in and become a fancy superstar. What other position would we see a rookie come in? And yes, he was a top 5 draft pick, but what would we hold them to the expectation of putting up top 5 fancy numbers at their positions? He's going right now with, roughly the 51st overall pick in fantasy leagues. That's too high. He has to move back. In no league situation should he be being taken prior to Hawk or Andrews. Those two are much safer options. We have seen them. What is this? Year 3 for Hawkinson now. I believe it might be year 4 for Mark Andrews. We have seen them get the job done. Be quality fantasy finishers. I believe they were actually the tight end 4 and 5 finishers last season. I don't understand the basis upon why we're taking Pitts so early. Because yes, the upside's awesome. It's there. But the floor is dang shaky. If you think that Hayden Hurst, who finished, I believe he was tight end 8 or 9 last season in fantasy and is a former first-round pick, is just going to be, boom, completely removed from the situation in Atlanta, and they're not going to run 2 tight end sets with him on the field, I would tell you that you're wrong. I think that Hayden Hurst still 100% has a role on this team. He's going to be a more veteran player, a better blocker probably early on, and they're going to need players to help coach up Kyle Pitts because the NFL is a big adjustment for that position. When you're blocking defensive ends, yes, Kyle Pitts will be split out wide, put out stacked in the slot. They'll use him in a lot of different ways and primarily as a receiver, but there is a whole nother element that he is going to have to figure out and get rolling before he can really reach his potential and his ceiling here with this team. So Kyle Pitts, great talent, great player, but I think that these tight end 1 overall days, these future-esque projections of him being a top 3 fantasy tight end are a year, maybe even 2, possibly 3 down the line here. So eventually he probably will take his place on the fantasy throne as the king of the tight end position, but I am not ready to declare him yet that in his rookie season. Adam Thielen, another big name. I'm hopping off. Basically the same reason for a Mike Evans last year. Mike had 13 touchdowns in 16 games. Adam Thielen had 14 touchdowns in 15 games. And whereas I think there's a legitimate argument to be made that Mike Evans is the number 1 option on his own respective team, you can make the argument Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, go whichever way you must. Adam Thielen is not the number 1 option on his team anymore. I'm sorry. Justin Jefferson, when you have 1,400 yards as a rookie wide receiver in only 14 starts, and you outpace the veteran at the position in basically every stat outside of touchdowns, targets, yards per catch, yards after the catch, total yardage output, you are the better player. And Adam Thielen is a very, very good. At this point, he's pretty much playing the slot. We saw him struggle without Diggs in the sense that when he didn't have another true number 1 option, he had to play outside more. Thielen does more good damage from the slot where he can move in and out of the lineup and run routes in or out breaking. Thielen will come in this year, still a very good player, but he's in a run-first offense. The number 1 receiver is going to grasp a hold of the majority of the fantasy work, and the number 2 guy can still be very productive, but he's going to take a prominent back seat to that next player. When Jefferson runs routes the way he does, when he's athletic as he is, has fresh legs, stays healthy, Thielen usually is dealing with nagging injuries of some sort and is usually struggling with something by the end of the season. His touchdown numbers will drop. And when that drops, the yardage I don't expect to be back to where it once was. He only had 925 yards, so you're literally talking about creeping towards having 500 less receiving yards in just one more. You had to start more than Justin Jefferson in almost 500 less yards in the total span of the season. So it's a very extreme situation here. 14 TDs, you'd be happy to see him get back to 9 or 10. He's going to need to get around 1,100 to 1,200 receiving yards just to try and compensate for the drop-off in production in that category. And again, I don't think that's the safest expectation in the world for him to get back to those numbers. So a big-time fade here. Adam Thielen, there's a lot of players I would much rather have on my team as a fantasy wide receiver option. Kenny Golladay isn't one of those players, though, and I love Kenny G's upside. I think he can be a top 12 player if everything goes well. But how can we expect things to go well when we hear all these reports about Daniel Jones, how ineffective and how inconsistent he is as a passer? I like Danny Dimes in fantasy football, but the fact that we named him Danny Dimes is just kind of a big slap in the face to the football community because he does not throw very many dimes. I like him better because he can pull the ball down, tuck it, and run. He can run inside zone read and fool a defensive end and run for, we saw him go, 70-some yards down the field before he tripped over his own shoelaces and fell flat on his face. Daniel Jones can run, he can scramble, he can move in and out of the pocket. But what he is not is a poised passer. He has fumble issues, interception issues, you name it. Kenny Golladay is going to be a direct, I don't want to say a benefactor, because I think that Daniel Jones will infringe upon his fantasy value. And Kenny G's got his own personal issues with health, staying on the field. As of, it was Tuesday, he tweaked something. We don't quite know what it is yet at the time of recording this video, and had to leave practice with the trainer before a complete brawl, like WWE style fight broke out at Giants training camp. Apparently Corey Coleman got smoked, and then somebody stepped up for him is Evan Ingram, and then he got punched in the face by Logan Ryan, and then the whole the reports say Daniel Jones was on his back at the bottom of this dog pile, and everyone was just going, full throwing punches, and yikes is all I gotta say for the New York Giants. So I love Kenny G. Like I said, he's got some of the best bodily awareness and ability to position himself to make crazy catches in the red zone, make big contested grabs. He's a tall dude, but hey, if you're dealing with injuries and you've got dysfunction in your franchise, your quarterback is a big question mark. Who knows if that offensive line will get back to the level that they hope it can be? A lot of risk here. I love some Tyler Lockett, right around the same ADP as these last two players. So I'm fading Kenny G down the board. Don't get me wrong, the upside is still 100% there, but that floor, I think the more we hear out of camp, the more we see that Kenny G is still getting some nagging stuff pop up in his way, the less I tend to want to push him up my draft board and move him down in contrasting fashion. And then the last player on the board here, another guy going around very similar draft position, but about a round later at the 66th overall pick, Odell Beckham Jr. Don't pick him. Let some other knucklehead in your fantasy league do it. Convince that one guy who shows up on draft day, didn't do any research, let him pick OBJ. Odell is, known for his explosive ability, known for his slant routes, which are lethal if he can get past the second level of the defense. But look, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here by any means, but as a player a fantasy player that is, who generally likes to err on the side of caution, I typically I'm not too harsh on players coming off of ACL injuries, because I've seen time and time again, guys can come back and they can fight through adversity and have productive seasons. But there is another key element missing from OBJ's fantasy situation this year. that makes me have a lot more caution and hesitancy with picking him, and that is the Browns. The Browns offense is very, very good, loaded with talent. So that should mean he's seeing lighter coverage. It should mean he's being crazy efficient, getting elite numbers whenever he gets the chance. The volume isn't there. This is what concerns me. It's not even so much. The typical argument would be, hey, there's so many mouths to feed. OBJ's not going to get his usual due because you've got to get the ball to Jarvis, Austin Hooper, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. There's names all over the place. You got to throw the ball to them. Nope. The Browns run the ball 60% of their offensive snaps. 60%. Or dang close to that. You're telling me that a team with that much offensive firepower in the passing game throws the ball less than half the time? I mean, the days of Odell getting 10, 11 targets per game as a member of the Giants, long gone. OBJ is going to be a boom-bust, incredibly frustrating pick this year. You saw him against Dallas last year absolutely blow the top off that defense and have one of the most insane performances from the wide receiver position that year. But then look at the other performances he had while he was healthy last season. He's all over the map. He can't stay consistent because he doesn't have the opportunities to consistently get him the workload he needs to put up the elite numbers that he is very well capable of, but is being held back from. Additionally, somehow, Baker Mayfield, I don't know if it's pressure, it feels like he needs to feed the ball to Beckham. His numbers are just not as efficient and not as clean when he's playing with Odell as they are when he's just got Jarvis Landry on the field. So a lot of wonky stuff is going on in Cleveland. They might just have the best offensive line in football. They might just have a top 3 offensive personnel group. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really breed fantasy success outside of those 2 running back spots, which seem to be the only 2 positions worth drafting at their current price, in my opinion. So that was 10 players that I am fading or strictly avoiding at their draft positions this fantasy season. So with that, I'll see you guys in the outro. All right, you can't say that you haven't been warned. Those were the players I'm most skeptical of early on in draft boards. That was roughly the first 6.5 rounds of our 2021 fantasy leagues. I can make another one of these videos with the middle rounds or even later stages of the fantasy draft board that I am not so keen on drafting for my teams. But I think these players are the most important to know about because you certainly can't win your leagues with your first couple picks in most situations, but you can definitely lose it. And I think some of these guys definitely could do that for you, notably Clyde Edwards-Helaire, yeah, that was, you got me. I really had to go out and single him out there, but I just don't like some of these picks at the top of the draft board. I think it's foolish that we haven't yet moved them down our boards, and I hope we do so before draft season is over because otherwise some teams are going to be very let down and disappointed with their seasons this year. So if CEH proves me wrong this year, so be it. I guess I'll have to live with that, but he is one of the players I am least excited for this season. But without further ado, you guys, one more reminder before we head out today. It's still mock draft week, so probably a couple hours after this video goes up, I'll have a mock draft up on the channel just like I've done for every other day this week. So make sure to stay tuned for that and head down and click that subscribe button if you're new around here. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching today's video. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.